This happened when I was 19, during the summer between my first and second year of community college. I needed money fast, and a guy I used to work with at a grocery store texted me about an opening at a self-storage facility on the edge of town. Overnight security, he said, 9 p.m. to 5 a.m., 4 nights a week. All you do is sit in the office, do a walkthrough every couple hours, and call the emergency line if anything looks wrong. $14 an hour, which back then felt like a fortune for something that sounded like doing nothing. I drove out for the interview on a Tuesday afternoon. The place was bigger than I expected. 6 long rows of orange roll-up doors, a fenced perimeter, and a small brick office building near the entrance gate. The manager who interviewed me was a heavy-set guy named Dale, maybe mid-50s, who talked fast and seemed like he wanted to get the interview over with. He told me the facility had almost never had any real incidents. Occasional break-ins on other properties across town, sure, but not here. He said the cameras covered every row, the gate needed a code to open, and honestly, the job was mostly boring. I liked the sound of boring. I got hired on the spot and started that Friday. The first 2 weeks were exactly what Dale promised. I'd clock in at 9, sit in the office watching a bank of grainy monitors, do my rounds at 11, 1, and 3, and spend the rest of the time on my phone or half asleep with my feet up on the desk. The rows all looked the same at night, long stretches of corrugated metal doors lit by sodium lights that buzzed faintly and turned everything the color of weak tea. I got used to the quiet fast. There's a specific kind of silence you only get in a mostly empty industrial lot at 2 in the morning, and after a while, it stopped bothering me. The first strange thing happened during my 3rd week, on a Thursday. I was doing my 1 a.m. walkthrough, cutting through row D like always, when I noticed the door to unit D114 was up about a foot. Not fully open, just enough that you could see a gap of black underneath it. I checked my clipboard. According to the log, nobody had accessed that unit in over 4 months. I remember standing there for a second, deciding whether this was worth calling in over. I decided it probably was. I called Dale's after-hours line, and he picked up sounding annoyed, like I'd woken him up, which I probably had. He told me units get left slightly open sometimes if the renter didn't close it all the way, and that unless something looked disturbed inside, I should just log it, close it myself if I could reach the handle, and move on. I asked if I was allowed to look inside first. He said, sure, just don't touch anything. I crouched down and lifted the door another 2 feet so I could see in. It was just boxes. A stack of moving boxes, an old bike frame leaning against the back wall, a mattress standing on its side. Nothing that looked touched. I pulled the door back down, made sure it clicked into the locked position, and finished my round. I wrote it up in the log and didn't think much more about it. People forget to lock things. It happens. The second thing happened about 10 days later, and this time I couldn't explain it away as easily. I was on my 3 a.m. round, walking down row F, when I heard what sounded like someone dragging something metal across concrete. It was distant, coming from somewhere near the back fence line, past row H, which was the last row before the property ended in a stretch of dead grass and a chain-link fence with barbed wire on top. I stopped walking and just listened. The sound continued for maybe 10 seconds, then stopped completely. I want to be honest that my first instinct wasn't fear, it was mild annoyance, because I assumed it was probably a raccoon getting into something or a piece of loose sheet metal shifting in the wind. I walked toward row H to check it out, mostly because I figured I'd have to note it in the log either way. When I got to the end of row H, I didn't see anything. No animal, no loose metal, nothing on the ground. But I did notice that the gate at the very back of the property, the one that led out to the drainage ditch behind the facility, was standing open. That gate was supposed to be padlocked at all times. I remember it specifically because Dale had mentioned it during training, said it was the one weak point in the perimeter, and that if I ever found it open, I needed to report it immediately. No exceptions. I called it in. This time, Dale sounded more alert, less annoyed. He asked if I saw anyone. I said no. He told me to close the gate, put a zip tie through it if I had one in the office supply drawer, and stay near the front office until he could get someone out to replace the padlock in the morning. He said this kind of thing had happened maybe once or twice before, kids probably, cutting through the property as a shortcut. He didn't sound totally convinced of his own explanation, but I didn't push it. I zip-tied the gate, walked back to the office, and spent the rest of that shift with the office door locked, which I had never done before. For the next few nights, nothing happened. I started to relax again, the way you do when your brain decides the scary thing was a one-time fluke. I even joked about it with the day shift guy, a college kid named Marcus who worked the desk in the mornings. He laughed and said the place probably just had raccoons that had figured out how to work a padlock, which didn't make sense, but it made me feel better anyway.
Then came the night that changed everything. About 3.5 weeks into the job. It was a Tuesday, slow like always, and I was doing my 11 p.m. round. I turned into row C and noticed a man standing near unit C8, about halfway down the row. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, facing the door of the unit, not moving. My first assumption was that it was a renter, someone who'd come late to grab something and just hadn't checked in with the office, which technically wasn't allowed after 9 but did happen occasionally with regulars. I called out, asked if he needed help finding anything. He didn't answer. He didn't turn around either. I stood there for a few seconds, feeling the first real prickle of unease, and called out again, a little louder. This time he turned his head, just his head, not his whole body, and looked at me over his shoulder. He was an older man, maybe 60, wearing a gray jacket that looked too heavy for the weather. The thing I noticed most, and the thing I still think about, was that he was smiling. Not a friendly smile. It was too wide, held too long, like he'd forgotten his face was doing it. He didn't say anything. After a moment, he turned back to face the unit door and just stood there again, like I hadn't spoken at all. I backed away slowly and went straight to the office. I checked the camera feed for row C, and the picture was there, grainy but visible, showing the man standing exactly where I'd seen him. I called Dale immediately. He told me to stay in the office, lock the door, and he'd call the emergency line himself since it was after midnight and the local non-emergency number wouldn't be much help. I sat there, watching the monitor, and the man didn't move for almost 20 minutes. He just stood facing that door. Then, on the monitor, I watched him slowly turn around and start walking. Not toward the exit, toward the office.
I want to be clear that at this point, my hands were shaking. I watched him walk the entire length of row C, turn onto the access road and keep coming in full view of the camera, moving at a normal, unhurried pace like a man taking an evening stroll. I locked the deadbolt on the office door, which I don't think had ever been used before, judging by how stiff it was. I turned off the office lights so it would look empty from outside, and I crouched behind the desk with my phone in my hand, watching the monitor glow in the dark. He walked right up to the office window and stood there, not trying the door, not knocking, just standing, facing the glass. And even though the lights were off inside, I swear he was looking directly at the spot where I was crouched, which shouldn't have been possible in the dark. I stayed frozen for what felt like an hour, but was probably closer to 5 minutes. Then, according to the monitor footage I checked afterward, he simply turned and walked away, back down the access road, back into row C, and out of frame near the back gate. The same gate that had been mysteriously open weeks before. I didn't move for a long time after that. When Dale finally called back, he said the local sheriff's deputy who covered the area had swung by and found nothing. No one on the property, gates secured. I told him what I'd seen. He was quiet for a second, and then said something I haven't been able to shake since. He said, "Does he have a jacket on? A gray one?" I said yes. There was a long pause, and then Dale said, "Just finish your shift, lock everything up. We'll talk in the morning," and hung up before I could ask what he meant. I did not sleep at all for the rest of that shift. When Marcus showed up at 5, I told him everything. He didn't laugh this time. He got quiet and told me that about 2 years earlier, before I was hired, a night guard named Curtis had reported something almost identical. An older man in a gray jacket walking the rows at night, never speaking, always smiling. Curtis quit less than a week after that, and never explained why beyond saying he wasn't paid enough to deal with it. I asked Marcus if anyone had ever figured out who the man was. He said no. Said Dale had looked into it once, checked the renter records for anyone matching that description, checked if any former employee looked like that, even asked around with the property next door in case it was someone's confused relative wandering over. Nothing ever came up. No name, no explanation. The man had simply appeared, twice, 2 years apart, to 2 different overnight guards, and vanished both times without ever being caught on camera leaving through the front gate, despite there being no other way in or out except that padlocked back gate by the drainage ditch. I want to say I quit immediately, but the truth is I needed the money too badly, and Dale offered to pair me with a second guard for the next few weeks, which made me feel marginally safer. Nothing happened for almost a month after that. I started to convince myself I'd overreacted, that it had probably been some harmless drifter who'd found a gap in the fence and gotten spooked when he heard me call out. Nothing more sinister than that. Then, on what turned out to be my second to last night working there, I was doing my 1 a.m. round with the second guard, a quiet guy named Elias, and we both heard it at the same time. Footsteps on the gravel access road behind row H, moving fast, coming toward us. We both froze. The footsteps stopped abruptly, maybe 30 feet away, somewhere in the dark beyond where the sodium lights reached. Neither of us moved. After almost a full minute of silence, Elias grabbed my arm, and we both walked backward toward the office without turning around, the way you're not supposed to do with an animal, but this didn't feel like an animal. We made it inside, locked the door, and called Dale.
He came out himself that time, along with the sheriff's deputy, and they walked the entire perimeter with flashlights. They found the back gate slightly open again, the padlock unlatched despite there being no visible sign it had been cut or forced. No footprints in the soft dirt near the ditch, even though the ground there had been damp from rain 2 days before and should have held a print easily.
I put in my 2 weeks' notice the next morning. Dale didn't try very hard to talk me out of it, which told me more than anything he actually said. I never found out who the man in the gray jacket was. I never found out how he got in and out of a fenced, gated property without ever appearing on camera leaving. I never found out why Curtis, 2 years before me, saw the exact same thing and quit just as fast. There's a slight possibility that it really was just some confused old man who'd found a way through a gap in the fence somewhere. Someone with dementia, maybe, wandering at night the way people sometimes do. And that the resemblance between what Curtis saw and what I saw was just coincidence layered onto 2 nervous teenagers working alone in the dark. But the more I think about it, the less that explanation holds together for me. Because a wandering old man doesn't usually stand outside a locked office window in the pitch dark and stare directly at the exact spot where you're hiding. And he doesn't usually vanish through a locked gate without leaving a single footprint in wet dirt. I looked into the property years later out of curiosity, long after I'd moved away for school. The storage facility is still there, under new ownership now. I don't know if Dale still works there, and I never tried to find Curtis to compare notes, which in hindsight, I probably should have done. Part of me didn't want confirmation. Part of me still doesn't.
Every now and then, when I'm walking somewhere at night and I hear footsteps on gravel behind me, I feel that same specific cold drop in my stomach. And for just a second, I'm back in row C, watching a man in a gray jacket turn his head and smile at me like he already knew exactly how the whole night was going to end.